You ever see something so absurd, so deeply wrong, you just have to shake your head and wonder if you're still in America? That's how it felt the morning Sergeant First Class Roland Kemper, 70 years old, sharp as ever despite the ache, stood beside his wife's fresh grave, suit hanging loose on his frame, hands trembling not from age, but from a kind of sorrow only life's longest goodbyes can bring. That grave 6 feet of cold October earth had just swallowed Margaret, his partner for 43 years, and now the only thing holding Roland upright was a sense of duty, the kind that never really leaves a soldier. Mist still clung to the cemetery, trees looming overhead, the place so quiet you could almost hear the memories breathing. That's when a young officer barely out of the academy, badge still shining like he just unwrapped it, stepped up, and without so much as a pause, told Roland, "Sir, you're under arrest for trespassing on public property during a funeral service." Yeah, that really happened. The funeral was over, but Roland had stayed, talking to Margaret the way only two people who've weathered life together can, his voice barely above a whisper, his suit the same navy blue he'd worn to collect his Bronze Star nearly 3 decades ago. He'd lost track of time, but honestly, when you're saying goodbye to half your soul, does anyone really care about posted hours? Roland's life had been all about service, from enlisting in 72 straight out of high school, to dragging 3 wounded men to safety in a far-off warning that Bronze Star. Not that he ever boasted about building houses in the same community for 30 years after he hung up his uniform. Margaret had been the one to keep him grounded, to help him process the nightmares, the medical bills, the everyday fights with civilian life. For 3 years, he'd been her caretaker, her driver, her shield against cancer, never once complaining. Not about the costs, not about the fear. Her death last Tuesday left him adrift, like an anchor line had snapped. So, yeah, Roland lingered at Oakwood Cemetery, just trying to feel close to her again, whispering memories while the world kept turning. But rules are rules, and Officer Danny Morrison on the job for all of 8 months, maybe trying a little too hard to show he was in charge, saw nothing but a trespasser. The cemetery had closed its gates the night before, and Morrison, already sure he had a vagrant on his hands, approached with his hand on his radio. Roland explained, voice heavy with grief, that he'd been there since morning, that he'd just lost track of time. Morrison didn't hear grief, heard excuses, told him visiting hours were over, and the law was the law. Roland, still the soldier, asked for 5 more minutes just to finish his prayers. Morrison saw defiance, not desperation, called him back up. Within minutes, more officers pulled up, lights bouncing off the headstones, turning a private moment into a show of force. Roland, overwhelmed, sat on a bench to gather himself, arthritis and heartbreak making his body slow. But when your training says never let civilians dictate the terms, slow compliance looks like resistance. The officers surrounded him, demanding he stand and put his hands behind his back. Roland, muscle memory kicking in, tried to comply, but when you're 70, nothing moves fast. Morrison didn't see a tired old man saw a problem. The cuffs went on, cold metal biting his wrists, and Roland felt something inside him just break. He remembered another set of cuffed enemy hands, a dark cell, days waiting for rescue. But this time it was his own country. All he could think about, as he was led past Margaret's grave, was how much she'd hate to see him treated like this. She'd always been proud of his service, the kind of pride that was quiet but unshakable. Now here he was, at the end of a long life, being shoved toward a patrol car like some criminal. Let me back up a sec. At that very moment, Mrs. Chun, who ran the corner market, the same one Roland stopped at to buy Margaret's favorite flowers, spotted the flashing lights. She knew Roland's story. She started calling around, and word spread fast. One of those calls reached Tommy Rodriguez, a young Marine just 3 blocks away. Tommy had met Roland at the VFW, swapped stories, shared the kind of brotherhood that cuts across generations. When he heard what was happening, he threw on his dress blues and started dialing every Marine he knew. It took minute 6 more Marines, all in their best uniforms, marching toward the cemetery. They didn't shout, didn't make threats. They just showed up, silent, steady, their shoes clicking on the path, eyes locked on the officers. Morrison was so rattled, he called for a taser when Roland, legs wobbling, stumbled on the walk to the car. That taser god help us dropped a 70-year-old veteran to his knees. The sound Roland made wasn't a scream. It was something deeper, something primal, the cry of a man who'd lost everything and was now being treated like nothing. The crowd swelled. Phones came out. The Marines stood in formation, a living wall of quiet authority, and Tommy stepped forward, calm as a sunrise. He asked to see Roland's ID, checked the service record, and then real cool asked Morrison what crime justified tasering a grieving veteran at his wife's grave. The backup cops started to realize this wasn't going the way they planned. The cemetery director arrived, so did Morrison's supervisor, and suddenly every decision was being recorded. The director confirmed that Roland had permission to be there. The trespassing charge vanished, and so did Morrison's confidence. Tommy and the Marines gently helped Roland to his feet, unlocked the cuffs, and guided him back to Margaret's grave. They stood watch, silent and respectful, as he finished his goodbye. For an hour, the Marines kept vigil, making it clear that some things are sacred, that the brotherhood doesn't end when the shooting stops. By now, Morrison's actions were under investigation: excessive force, lack of judgment, the whole 9 yards. The department changed policy on the spot. No more arresting elderly mourners without a supervisor's approval. Roland, still shaky, but with his dignity intact, thanked every Marine personally, his voice steadying with each handshake. They reminded him that honor isn't just a word, that you don't leave a brother behind. Not ever. News spread like wildfire: videos, interviews, editorials. Roland got letters from strangers, veterans, civilians, even kids thanking him, apologizing for what he'd suffered. 3 weeks later, he returned to Margaret's grave, letters in hand, one for each Marine who'd stood by him, handwritten the way Margaret always said important things should be done. In those letters, he tried to explain how much it had meant, how he'd thought his time of brotherhood was over, but discovered it never really ends. You know what I mean? Sometimes it takes the worst kind of moment to remind us what's worth defending: honor, compassion, the idea that nobody, not even the smallest or the oldest, stands alone when the moment calls for courage. That's the America Roland believed in, the one he'd served, the one Margaret had loved, the one those Marines still fight for. So here's the thing. Do you think justice was served, or did the system fail Roland that day? Would you have stepped up like those Marines did? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, share your story, and let's talk about what kind of community, what kind of country we all want to live in. Because in the end, standing up for each other, that's what makes us American, right?